I extend to you, I received an email just moments ago, in fact, from President Samuelson, and he extends his best wishes and his regrets that he couldn't be here, and his fondness for Brother Willis, and is appreciative, Mark, that you were willing to come and share your thoughts with us this evening. If I may, most of you have a program that has a short bio in there, and I'll read a bit of that in a moment for those of you that don't have it. But I wanted to take just a moment, maybe break tradition, and share a little story or two that you may not know about Brother Willis. And I'll have to thank his daughter Sue for helping me with this. And maybe I shouldn't have said that, but when I read these, he'll know where the script came from. So let me just share a little bit of a glimpse inside the man that you're about to hear from. Sue says, "Dad has always been organized. Most of us children were not so organized, so in an attempt to teach us, Dad decided to have a weekly closet inspection. We hated this. When our definition of a clean closet didn't quite match his, Dad brought us to look at his closet. It was amazing. Dad had his black socks in one drawer and his white socks in another drawer, and each piece of clothing was perfectly folded and in its exact spot. Dad believes that an organized life is a happy life." Second story. When Sunday would come around, we would all race to get the Sunday newspaper. By the time we were finished with it, it would inevitably be sprawled all across the family room. This drove Dad crazy. Crazy enough that we actually had a family home evening lesson dedicated to how to refold the newspaper when we were finished reading it. Third story. When I was a teenager, Mom went back to school to get her college degree. One of the ways Dad supported her in this was to come home on his lunch break and spend some time cleaning the kitchen. Incidentally, this is while Mark was an executive at General Mills. Sue says, "I'm pretty sure it was about this time that Dad became an expert at loading the dishwasher. He has strong opinions about how to organize the dishes and stack them for the best efficiency in cleaning. One day when he was showing my sister and I some of his techniques, he said, 'Girls, it's all about the flow,' meaning the water flow." And Sue says, "I must admit now, today, every time I load my dishwasher, I think of my dad and I hope that I'm getting the maximum water flow." We're always looking for new series ideas on BYU television, and so we thank you for those wonderful ideas. Mark H. Willis was appointed by President Monson as the president and CEO of Deseret Management Corporation in March of 2009. Prior to that, he retired as chairman, president, and chief executive officer of Times Mirror in April of 2000. Brother Willis joined Times Mirror as CEO in 1995. In addition, he served as publisher of the Los Angeles Times. Prior to joining the Times, Brother Willis served as vice chairman of General Mills. A 15-year veteran of that company, he served as president and chief operating officer, and in 1992 was named vice chairman. He also served as executive vice president and chief financial officer. Prior to this, Brother Willis served with the Federal Reserve System as president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis and the first vice president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia. He began his career as an assistant professor of finance at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. Mark was raised just north of here in Salt Lake City. He received his AB degree from Columbia College in New York and his PhD from Columbia Graduate School of Business. Among his other church assignments, Brother Willis has served as the president of the Minneapolis, Minnesota Stake for 9 years and as the president of the Hawaii Honolulu Mission for 3. Mark and his sweetheart Laura, who incidentally serves on the KBYU Advisory Board, have 5 children. Mark has often stated, I've heard him share this, his son-in-law shared this with me, that he and Laura did not attend BYU, but all of their children did. All of their daughters and sons-in-law did. In fact, all of his children met their spouses at BYU, and I suspect, Mark, that that's part of the reason for your fondness for this university. As a result, he has 3 daughters-in-law, 2 sons-in-law, and 20 grandchildren, the first of whom I understand is returning from his mission in Lithuania next week. Now, just a personal thought. I've known Mark and Laura for several years, but mostly by reputation. For the last few years, I've had the privilege of working with both of them, and I can tell you that it's truly been meaningful to be able to work with them on some very important initiatives and feel of their spirit and to feel of their testimony of the restored gospel. Just over a week ago, I was in a meeting with Mark in Salt Lake, and at the beginning of the meeting that he presided over, he spoke of hundreds of millions of people searching for light. And he said that they are drawn to that light because they are Heavenly Father's children, and they have the gift of the light of Christ. I won't say more about that because I'm not sure what Mark is planning to share tonight, but I will share with you that Mark Willis is one of the brightest and most penetrating lights that I've ever encountered. And it's a privilege to be his friend and to feel of his great spirit. Brother Willis.
I don't honestly know how I'm going to either live up to or overcome that introduction. Thanks, Sue. Well, you know a lot more about me than I wish you did. But isn't it nice to know that your kids just turn out to be great in spite of what you do? Now, I'll have to say, and this was not on my prepared remarks, but it should have been, closet inspection is a great idea. You know, it occurs to me I better, I don't do this in most of the speeches I give, but I think this is a place where I can. You can have a fantastic experience tonight. And I know that for a fact. And I know that not because of what I will say, but because of what the Lord has said and what he has promised you. In the 43rd section of the Doctrine and Covenants, starting with verse 8, the Lord said, "And now behold, I give unto you a commandment, that when ye are assembled together, ye shall instruct and edify each other, that ye may know how to act and direct my church, how to act upon the points of my law and commandments, which I have given. And thus ye shall become instructed in the law of my church, and be sanctified by that which ye have received." And then in verse 16, "And ye are to be taught from on high." That's a remarkable promise, which says that if we are open to the Spirit, it actually doesn't matter what I say, because you will be taught from on high. And I hope and pray that you will be. Now, I have to confess, I've given a lot of talks and lectures and other things over the years. Derek pointed out I was at one time a professor. I mean, you could just push a button in me and I'd go for 50 minutes. I mean, it just wasn't hard. And when I was asked to give this talk, and I thought about the man after whom the Maxwell Institute is named, and I thought about those who had preceded me, and then I thought about what I might do, I kept coming back to the question, why me? I am not a scriptorian. I am not a scholar. Why on earth did they ask me? And I remember an experience I had when I was at the LA Times, and several of us went over to mainland China, and we landed in Beijing the day after the United States had bombed the Chinese embassy in Belgrade. And needless to say, their feelings towards Americans were not friendly. All of our official appointments were canceled. And so we had a few visits, but we mostly did a little sightseeing. And every night on TV, I would turn on, I didn't understand what they were saying, but I could see people throwing bricks and paint cans at the U.S. Embassy in Beijing. And so the next morning I went to our reporter, who was also serving as our interpreter, and said, would you take us to the U.S. Embassy? I'd like to see what's going on. And he said, no, you can't go there. And we went off and did something else. And I repeated this for 3 days. And finally, on our last day, I said, we are going to go. Please take us there. And he realized who ultimately signed his paycheck, so he decided that would be a good thing to do. So we took a taxi within 2 blocks of the embassy, and there was a blockade across the street. And he went up and explained that we were U.S. citizens and we wanted to go to the U.S. Embassy, and they let us through. And we then got half a block away from the embassy, another blockade with another military group, and we could see the embassy literally kitty corner across the street. And he explained again that we were U.S. citizens and we wanted to go to the U.S. Embassy, and the soldier said no. And our reporter said, why? And the soldier said, there is no why. Well, I found that a remarkably unsatisfactory response. I have, however, learned that it does have its uses. We got home, I asked my wife to do something. She said, no. I said, why? She said, there is no why. The kids ask for the keys to the car. You say no. They say, why? You say, I mean, it really does have its uses. But I kept being troubled by why I was asked to give this lecture. And I thought about all the things that I could talk about. And I first thought about doctrinal subjects, and then I talked about Book of Mormon subjects. And I was having an absolute stupor of thought. And then I got thinking about the interactions that I had with Elder Maxwell. And it was very interesting to me. Every time he saw me, he would say, now tell me what you're doing. And I would, it was whether I was at the Fed or the General Mills or wherever I was, he'd tell me what you're doing. And we would then talk about what I was doing. It was remarkable to me that he was so interested in me and not only my career, but then what the things I was doing, how that would give him a perspective that would help him in his church assignment. And as I was thinking about that, I thought, well, maybe I'll talk about what I'm doing. And that immediately felt comfortable to me. So I sent an email to Professor Bradford and said, this isn't going to make any sense, but how would you feel if I talked about how we're trying to reinvent these media businesses? And he said, that's great. So if you don't like it, it's his fault. But the one thing I feel great comfort in is that if Elder Maxwell were here, he would have a smile on his face and actually be interested in what I have to say. So I hope that you're at least slightly interested in what I have to share with you tonight. For those of you who don't know, let me just give you a couple of sentences about what DMC has been and now is. There was a time when it was the company that was responsible for all of the for-profit businesses owned by the church, beneficial life insurance, real estate companies, and so on. Some of those have been transferred back to the church. Some of those have been sold by the church. So that now, today, we are primarily a media company. Deseret News, Deseret Book, KSL TV and radio, Bonneville International, and a new division we've set up called Deseret Digital Media, which is our internet division. And so what I'm going to do is talk for a few minutes about what we're trying to do, because as soon as I give you that list of media companies, you realize most of those are old media. I mean, if you read in the newspaper, you read newspapers are dying. If you read about television, people think television, broadcast television, is only one step behind. Many think books are going to go the way of all flesh. So we have these businesses, and in many people's minds, they really are old media with not much life left in them. And we happen to think that if we combine old media with new media and do some things in a different way, we actually have a lot of exciting things that lay before us. And that's what we're trying to do. When I was given this assignment, I tried to put down some basic assumptions that I thought ought to guide what I do and what we do. And let me just share those with you. The first was that we are owned by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The only reason for the church to continue to own us is if we are somehow a blessing to the church. Otherwise, just like it's done with hospitals and other things, it ought to get rid of us. The second was, we must be aligned, therefore, with the values of the church. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But those are values like integrity, civility, love, sacrifice, self-reliance, and so on. Therefore, all that we do and the way we do it must be aligned with and reflect those values. Now, that does not mean that we, meaning those of us who work at DMC, have to be members of the church. We are not the church. Membership is not required. But for all of us who are there, we must be aligned with those values and live those values. And finally, because the church is a worldwide church, we need to think about how we can have worldwide reach and worldwide impact, which means we have to set dramatically higher goals for what we do. We have to set dramatically higher goals for how professional we are and the kind of impact that we have. Well, starting from those very simple propositions, we decided that we would try to write for ourselves a mission statement and the values that go with that mission statement. And you have all of those at your chairs. And unless you sat on them and ruined them, you might want to take a look at them. Now, for those of you who've dealt with mission statements, and I've read a lot of them over the years, they kind of all read the same. I mean, they're all for motherhood and apple pie. We're just going to be wonderful. We're going to do good things. And so you can look at these mission statements and you kind of see the same thing in virtually all of them. The power in a mission statement comes from the fact that if you decide to internalize it, if you make it part of you, it will then help transform you. And I hope to show in a small way, and as you watch us in the years ahead, in a major way, you will see that this mission statement is literally transforming what we do and the way we do it. We are not the same companies or set of companies now that we were a year ago, and we will not be the same 2 years from now and 3 years from now and 4 years from now, because this mission statement is meaningful to us and it is changing what we do and the way we do it. Now, you'll see on the sheet that you have there, our mission is we are trusted voices of light and knowledge, reaching hundreds of millions of people worldwide. Let's just start with that notion of hundreds of millions. And that, by the way, is people, not internet hits. We're talking about real life people around the world. I used to think that I was relatively bold. I did not make up that objective. I would not have the courage to make up that objective. But we had one of the senior brethren come and rededicate the Deseret book building. And it was very interesting to me because in his prepared remarks, and then at least on one other occasion when he looked up from his prepared remarks and said something that obviously was on his mind, he looked at all of us connected with Deseret Book and said, your responsibility is to find a way to reach hundreds of millions of people. I confess to you that we just kind of staggered out of that session. But as we thought about it, frankly, as we've prayed about it, we believe that he was giving us a prophetic expression and challenge that we must somehow find a way to live up to. Obviously, if we're to reach hundreds of millions, it means way outside the Wasatch Front. It means way outside Utah. It means way outside the church. It means we have to do things in such a way that we really, literally are appealing to hundreds of millions of people around the world. Now, notice it says in there that we are going to reach. It does not say convert. We are not the church. We are not going to teach doctrine. Our purpose is quite different than that. We hope to support what the church does, but our purpose is to reach, to enlighten, to help, to edify, to lift up, to strengthen. Now, it turns out that there's a remarkably powerful thing that happens to any business if you set an objective that seems unrealistically high. I learned this first when I was at General Mills, and the man who was responsible for all of our plants around the country, and we had about 9 plants, Cheerios, Wheaties, Betty Crocker, cake mixes, hamburger helper, all those sorts of things. And one day he made a calculation of how long it took if we were going to change from one product to another, to stop the production line, take off the tooling, put on new tooling, clean it, start it up, and then start producing the next product. And on average, it took us 3 hours to do that. So every time we changed from one product to another, 3 hours. He then multiplied that 3 hours across all of our plants for a month. And it turned out we were spending an enormous amount of money simply from these changeovers in our plants. So he called all his people together and he said, our current level of performance is 3 hours. The new standard is 10 minutes. And they looked at him like you're looking at me and say, well, that's ridiculous. And he said, no, that is not ridiculous. You have to find a way to go from 3 hours to 10 minutes. Well, what did they do? They went to the NASCAR pit stops. You ever seen these things? The cars come in, the wheels go off, the gas goes in, and the cars go out. They took a video of that process and then took it back to their office and went through frame by frame saying, what can we learn from what happens in that pit stop that we can apply to a changeover in our plants? When I left General Mills, 11 minutes. 11, wasn't 10, but it was pretty darn good. 3 hours, 11 minutes. I was impressed. In fact, I was so impressed with what they did. I was bragging about it one day to a man who was a CEO of a large engine manufacturer. I mean, these were great big truck engines. And he said, well, that's very interesting. We had the same problem. I said, really, what was your changeover time? He said, 10 hours. I said, well, wow, what was your new standard? He said, 10 minutes. I said, did you get there? He said, yes. I said, how do you do it? He said, we went to the NASCAR pit stops, took a video. Now, there are 2 things that are interesting about that story. The first is, if you set a very dramatic goal, you cannot increment your way there. You have to think about things in a fundamentally different way. The second thing is often, if not always, the answer is out there rather than where you are. In other words, you have to get out of your mental set, out of what you're doing, and find out what somebody else is doing, and then figure out how to apply that to what you're doing. Well, having had that experience, when I went out to run Times Mirror, and the Los Angeles Times was our largest newspaper, and if this was in 1995, and what you read about newspapers then was exactly what you read about today. They're declining in circulation. It's only a matter of time before they die. And the LA Times had gone from about 1.5 million circulation down to, it was just about to drop below 1 million. And I called everybody in and I said, not on my watch. You're about to drop below 1 million. Your new goal is an increase in circulation of 500,000, 50%. Well, they looked at me just like those plant people did. I mean, they said, what did you start smoking since you came out to California? I said, I'm not smoking anything. That's the new target. So they went back and said, he must be serious. We better figure out what to do. Before I left, we'd increased by 200,000, 20%. And then the company was sold out from under me, by the way, but that's another story. But we had increased by 200,000, 20%, when virtually everybody else was declining. Interesting to see what's happened since I left. They've gone from 1,200,000 to 675,000. Without that goal, without saying, what can I do that's dramatically different in order to grow, they've declined by almost over 40%. So there's power in setting an objective that appears to be so ambitious that you can't possibly get there, and that's the magic of it. Because if you can't get there doing what you're currently doing by growing 1%, 2%, 3%, then you have to think radically differently, and some wonderful things can happen. Now, take a look at another word in that mission statement. We are to be trusted voices. That has a very special meaning for us. It means that we're not only going to be trusted if we do it right by our readers, our viewers, our listeners, and our users, but we have to be trusted by our owner. Remember, I started by saying we are owned by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It means that we are not going to damage the church. We are not going to gratuitously poke the church in the eye. And the fact is, sometimes we've done that. Let me give you one quick example. Shortly after I was given this assignment, we ran a really wonderful article in the Deseret News about the City Creek project in Salt Lake City, this massive undertaking by the church in downtown Salt Lake. There isn't a city in the world that wouldn't drool to have a project like that financed without debt, without bonds, without all of the other things that normally take place. And we wrote just this wonderful article about how the project was coming in the midst of the worst recession since the Depression. And then, for the sake of balance, we found somebody who was disgruntled about the project and quoted them saying what a terrible thing it was. What's the point? What's the point? What good does that do? In talking with the people in our newsroom, and you might imagine this is a very sensitive subject because it goes to the heart of journalism. It goes to the notion of balance. It goes to the notion of independence. And it turns out that's not quite as simple to think about and talk about as most people make it out to be. The research done about news outlets, radio, TV, newspapers, magazines, suggests that virtually everybody in the world thinks they're biased. Now, they have different biases. Some are liberal, some are moderate, some are conservative. The biases are different. But virtually everybody who reads us, looks at us, watches us, listens to us, thinks that we and everybody else are biased. It's only a number of journalists who will say, well, no, we're not. You know what's interesting? I had 1,000 people in the newsroom at the LA Times. We probably had 2,000 journalists in all of our newspapers. I talked to a lot of journalists in the 5 years I was there. And when I talked to them and I say, why did you come into journalism? They said, because I wanted to make a difference. I said, that's great. What does that mean? It said, had one editor tell me, a wonderful editor, say to me, the purpose of a great newspaper is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comforted. That sounds like a double bias to me. What that sounds like to me is if I'm writing a story about those who are downtrodden, those who need help, I'm going to tilt the story to try to, quote, comfort them. And if I'm doing a story about somebody in the power structure, I'm going to tilt the story to poke them in the eye. Actually, that's what happens. I was getting ready to write my PhD dissertation, and I went to my professor and I said, how do I write an unbiased dissertation? He said, don't even try. He said, the fact of the matter is everybody who writes is going to be influenced by their experience, their maturity, their life, the kind of life they've had, the influences they've had, and their own perceptions and preconceptions. He said, the importance of a university is you will have a lot of biased books in an unbiased library. And I learned a great principle. Now, are we going to try to be biased? I don't like the word. It's a pejorative word. It says we're going to twist things to make them untrue. We're not going to twist them to make things untrue. That would be unethical. What it does mean is that we're going to cover things in a way that to us makes sense. Let me give you an example. Suppose we were to do an article on the homeless. And we would talk about the challenges that the homeless have getting medical care, the danger they face if they have no place to go in the winter and it's cold outside, and so on and so on and so on. And we would try to write an article that helped all of us really understand the plight of the homeless. What we would not do, for the sake of, quote, balance, is put someplace in the article, well, of course, the fact is, the reason they're homeless is because they made bad decisions and it's their fault. Now, there are people who think that. We could get a quote from somebody, but what's the point? Why do it? Why take all the energy and the empathy and the power out of a wonderful article just for the sake of balance? We wouldn't do that. Therefore, when you think about balance, it's not a matter of twisting the truth. It's a matter of choosing those things that you emphasize and those things that you don't. It's a matter of telling the story you want to tell, recognizing that in today's world, there are going to be 1,000 other people who are going to tell a different story. And we know that and we love that. We're just going to make sure we tell our stories in a way that are consistent with our values, which is to show people love and respect and concern. By the way, that editor never understood that in most people's minds, it's the press that are comforted and ought to be afflicted. If you look at the word, we better move along here. I told you I could go 50 minutes without stopping, and I'm going to go longer than that, and I don't want to do that. You remember the story, I'm going to take this off so I don't go longer than that. You remember the story about the Mormon boy and the Catholic boy? They decided they'd go to each other's church. So they first went to the Catholic church, and they saw the priest up in front make the sign of the cross, and the Mormon boy turned to the Catholic boy and said, "What's that? What does that mean?" And he explained the symbolism in that. And then they went to the Mormon sacrament meeting, and the speaker got up and took his watch off and put it very conspicuously on the podium. And the Catholic boy said to the Mormon boy, "What does that mean?" He said, "It doesn't mean a thing." Anyway, look at the word light. When we think of the word light, we think not only of the traditional journalistic function of shining a light in dark places, exposing corruption, highlighting problems, but for us it goes way beyond that. Elder Maxwell said, "The matter of being a light is even more important in dark times. Our impact, for better or worse, on others is inevitable, but it is intended to be that we be a light and not just another shadow." We take this notion of light very deeply. We think it means standing for light and truth. We think it means battling against hate and the darkness of hate. I have to tell you, it's been very interesting for us to move back to Utah after being out of Utah for more than 40 years. And I hear the church say, love your neighbors. Put your arms around them. Make them feel welcome. And then I hear very good members of the church say, I don't like that they're here. Throw them in prison. Send them home. You know who I'm talking about. We're not going to get into the politics of that. Church is not going to get into the politics of that. We'll cover it. We'll report on it. But we also hope to take on subjects and show people that if you really mean that you're against the darkness of hate, you have to live it. You have to exemplify it. You have to talk about it and try to help it. It also means for us elevating the civic dialogue. It is amazing to me the nature of public discourse and what that has become. Because of that, we've done two things and have some other things we will do, but two that we've already done so that I can report on it. The first is last Sunday, we launched a new television show. 9 o'clock Sunday morning. Bruce Lindsay, one of our outstanding anchors, is the host of the show. And this is a public interest show. This is a place that we think will become a signature show for KSL. And it's a place where people can come in a civilized, dignified, respectful way and talk about difficult issues. I think you'll like it. Doesn't mean you have to agree with what anybody says. We'll try to expose all points of view. But we're going to do it in a way that helps show, helps demonstrate that you can talk about very difficult issues with respect and with civility. Second, last weekend, we took KSL.com comment boards dark. If you wanted to make a comment on something that you saw on KSL, you could not. We've looked at those comment boards, and the fact is they are atrocious. What's happened is our comment boards, like frankly virtually every other comment board in the world, has become subject to the tyranny of the extremes. You have people on this side and people on this side who hate each other, and that's what you see in the comments. To call them civil would not pass a single English class in this university because the dialogue is just awful. And we felt we had a responsibility to help change that. So we went dark, and if you try to make a comment, you got a little message that says, here's our philosophy. From now on, we're going to have people comment. We want to have you come. We welcome you to come, but you need to be civil. And to help you do that, it's no longer possible to post an anonymous comment. You know, it used to be if you sent a letter to the editor, you had to sign your name. Now all these comments, you be whoever you want to be. Nobody knows who you are. Well, that's changed. You have to register with us. You're going to have a profile that will follow you so that people can see what you're doing. There are little tabs on there so that those who see your comment can rate your comment. Was it civil or was it not civil? Was it helpful? Was it not helpful? Was it on the subject or not on the subject? Fascinating to me when we announced what we were doing with our new mission statement, and there was a little thing on KSL, and I went and looked at the comments, and the first comment had nothing to do with our mission statement, and suddenly I see this big back and forth on tithing. Well, I mean, it had nothing to do with us, but that's what's happened. Well, the initial indication, oh, by the way, you'll also be able, once this is completely developed, you can filter out anything you want. You filter. We don't filter. We're not trying to control. We're trying to help you control. So if you say, I only want to look at comments that are actually on the subject, you can do that, and that's what you'll get. If you say, I don't want to see any of the comments from people who are hostile, you can just filter those out. We think this is going to make a difference. Early indications are quite encouraging. We're going to, as soon as we can, do the same thing with DeseretNews.com. I pled with them to have DeseretNews.com go dark tonight, because we have a reporter here who's going to actually write a little something about this, and it's going to go up, and you know, who knows what's going to happen. We couldn't quite make that work, but let me invite you to join the discussion on our comment boards. Let me invite you to bring civility to what we do. Let me invite you to literally help make the world a little better place. Okay, let's go to the word knowledge. Elder Maxwell said, there were no newspapers as we know them at the time of Jesus' ministry. Had there been, one can guess that the news coverage of the day would have missed the significance of what was transpiring at and after Calvary. While perhaps reporting the return of Pilate to Caesarea after a long weekend in Jerusalem, or while noting the arrival and departure of new trade caravans, the atonement, the central fact of human history, would have been ignored or subordinated to other busy and important things of the time, unless the publisher had perspective about things as they really were. We're going to try to have a better understanding of things as they really are, and make sure, yes, we're going to cover sports, we're going to cover flu shots, we're going to cover all those sorts of things. But we're also going to try to cover the really important things as they are. Well, how do we do that? How do we do all of this? Let me just give you a couple of thoughts. If we're to succeed in old media, and interestingly enough, in new media, we have to be relevant. We've done a lot of research before I got this job, but nevertheless, I think relevant. And it shows that people will make time in their lives for things that are important to them. And the interesting thing is, it's you that define that, not us. We can write things for professional colleagues. We can produce video productions that will win awards. And none of that makes any difference if you don't find it relevant to your lives. And therefore, in all that we do, we're trying to ask increasingly, what can we do to be relevant to you? Very interesting to me. We have not often asked you. We will, so that we know what's relevant to your life. One of the things we have done, because we did listen to one group, is we started a new Spanish language newspaper called El Observador, published 3 times a week. It's the fastest growing market in Utah, a market that believes that nobody takes them seriously. Fact is, very few did take them seriously. It has been very interesting to watch. We had a little open house to launch the paper at the Capitol Rotunda in Salt Lake. Hispanic woman from the mayor's office came up with tears in her eyes and said, "Thank you for taking us seriously. We're meeting a need that was real and there, and we hope to do a lot more." Some of you may have seen Mormon Times. It was a jolt to some journalists to have a thing called Mormon Times in the newspaper. 96% of our readers are members of the church. The fact is they love that edition. If you don't take the Deseret News on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, you are missing a treat. This happens to come out on Thursday. Church News comes out on Saturday. If you haven't seen Mormon Times, you have really missed something. We can help that, by the way. We know how to sign you up. We need to be more emotional. The fact of the matter is, particularly in today's world, if you aren't touched by what we do, you get bored and go someplace else. And therefore, we have to find a way day in and day out to reach you in such a way that you are so moved that you can hardly wait to read us or watch us or listen to us again. Let me suggest to you, we're getting better at that. In fact, we had a series recently that is one of the best bits of journalism I have seen anywhere, and that was the Deseret News coverage of what was going on in Haiti. If you don't take the Deseret News, you didn't see that picture. That's a picture of a non-member mother and her newborn child in an LDS chapel in Haiti. There is no more tender picture on the planet. And those doctors and nurses inside that chapel didn't say, "Are you a member of the church?" They said, "What can we do to help?" And they did. It had nothing to do with the church, and yet it had everything to do with the church. Can you all see that? And there was a medical student from Texas, a member of the church, went down to help and serve. He and his wife had been married for 5 years, had not been able to have any children. While he was down there, they talked about whether or not they should adopt a Haitian child. She went to the temple, called her husband and said, "Yes, we should. Look for a little girl, a small little girl with short hair and a big stomach." And I've gone on the internet, and here's where you might look. Here's an orphanage. Got in a vehicle with one of his companions, drove as far as they could, walked about another mile, could not find the orphanage that she had found, but found an orphanage that nobody knew about. Totally run down. The kids there were just being dropped off because they had no parents. He was surrounded by at least 20 children. In the article, talks about how awkward he felt, as though he was in a market trying to buy a child. Over on the side, saw this little girl and said, "Yes, she's the one." We have people in our newsroom who read that story and wondered why Scott wrote it. Scott's here, by the way, one of the best reporters we've got. Wrote these magnificent stories on Haiti. Why would he write it? because they'll never get that child out of Haiti. The legal restrictions are such, it's impossible. They will never get that child out. Well, guess what? I have total confidence they will, because that was not a coincidence. This is a nurse who works for Humanitarian Services. Lost her husband in 9/11. Went to Haiti to help. If we had time, I'd read her story. She saw this little boy within 2 days of death, knew that if he didn't get help, he would die. Cleaned his wounds, picked him up, took him to a hospital, and held him, telling him she loved him and would not put him down until he was in safe hands. Having lost someone dear to her once before, she was not about to lose that little boy. Do we know how to do emotional journalism? You bet we do. You bet we do. Well, let me just let me do one more thing, and then I've got a little demonstration, and then I'll quit. By the way, I brought visual aids because I'm so used to the Relief Society showing us up. You know, you go to a Relief Society affair, you got the tablecloths and everything, and men have nothing. One of the keys to great journalism is to ask more interesting questions. Because the fact is, the more interesting the question you ask, the more interesting the answer is. That's what Scott did in Haiti. He wasn't just asking how many were killed, what's the value of the devastation that's taking place. He was asking, who is that mother? Who is that angel nurse? Why is that medical student going out there to that orphanage? I learned this when we ran a series in Baltimore. Louis Farrakhan had said there's no such thing as slavery in Africa. Typical way a journalist would deal with that question is to say, well, I wonder if that's true. So they go and interview people who say, yes, there is. They'd interview other people who say, no, there isn't. They'd quote all the experts and leave the reader totally confused about whether there is or is not slavery in Africa. This editor said that's the wrong question. The question is, can I buy a slave? We sent a foreign correspondent, an African-American correspondent from downtown Baltimore, and went to Africa and bought 2 slaves. Most interesting expense report I've ever approved, $1,000, 2 slaves. And they then wrote this absolutely wrenching, riveting series. How did this African-American feel on an airplane going to Africa to buy another human being? Talked about how these 2 boys that we bought were stolen away by the slavers from their blind mother and sold into slavery. And then how thrilled she was when we gave them back to her. If you ask interesting, compelling, powerful questions, you can do interesting, compelling, powerful journalism. Well, let's just do one more thing and then I'll quit. You're wondering what's behind the curtain. I meet every day people who are very skeptical that we can actually do it. They say, yeah, we hear that talk, that's great, we love the way you talk about it, but the fact is you can't do it. You're too late. The internet's going to take over the world, you're dead. Here's my response to dead. When I grew up in Utah, which both Laura and I did, I thought water was free. Not only in the tap at home, but I'd walk down Main Street and I'd push a little button on this thing that was on the sidewalk and water would come out and I would drink it. It was a new idea to me that you could actually sell water in a bottle. This is Albertson's water, right here in this case Salt Lake. You can buy this for 60 cents or just under 2 cents an ounce, bottled water. This is smart water. I don't know what makes it smart, but I do know whoever sells it is smart. That's 2 cents an ounce. This is 4 cents an ounce, twice as much. This is Metro Mint water. Has a hint of mint and chocolate in it. 7 cents an ounce. 2 cents, 4 cents, 7 cents. I can call it Angel Fire Water and put it in a different shaped bottle. 10 cents an ounce. You can see where this is going, can't you? I can put it in a nice red bottle, 13 cents an ounce. I can put bubbles in it. I say bubbles rather than gas, it just sounds better. And sell it in a hotel, 21 cents an ounce. 2 cents, 21 cents. And my personal favorite, everybody who's young knows what, can you see what that says? Bling. Can you imagine where this is made? Would you guess Beverly Hills? 2 cents an ounce on the left side. $1.56 an ounce. That bottle is $39. I hope it's getting better with age. I mean, that's really... Every time I've done this little demonstration, I've had somebody who'd pay me full price for it. I mean, you imagine 1,000 of your best friends and you have this sitting on the table, they think you're pretty special, right? What's the point? The point is, people who make bottled water, let me give you a couple of pieces of data. There are 3,000 brands of bottled water around the world. Americans in 2007 spent $15 billion on bottled water. In 1976, the average American drank 1.6 gallons of bottled water. Today, the total is more than 28 gallons of bottled water. Growth in the sales of bottled water for the last 30 years has been at a compound rate of 8%. Just to put that number in perspective, if the church grew at a compound rate of 8% for the next 30 years, it would go from 13.5 million to 135 million members. How have they done it? They've done it because they have found a need you didn't realize you had until they offered it. Convenience, taste, shape, color, in properties inside. They have found that you don't necessarily think water in the tap is safe. Sometimes it was, sometimes it wasn't. They find you like to go hiking and you take bottled water with you, and on and on and on. And by finding what you are interested in, they have been able to sell this huge amount of bottled water. Well, now let me ask you. If they can grow at a compound rate of 8% by selling water, shouldn't we be able to grow by selling relevant, compelling, emotional content in print, on the radio, on TV, and yes, on the internet? My view is, if they can sell water, we can sell what we do and have a whole lot more fun in the process. Thank you very much.